They thought she was just a homeless little girl who wandered into Stanford, until she stood on tiptoe, touched the marker to the whiteboard, and the highest seminar room rose to its feet. Not for an answer, but for the way a child taught us to hear mathematics breathe. That morning, the sky above Stanford lay silver gray. The rain from the night before had left droplets trembling on the eucalyptus trees, each one catching the pale light like shards of glass. Inside Jordan Hall, on the top floor, an advanced seminar in algebraic topology was underway. At the front, Professor Callahan was speaking in his gravelly, exacting voice. His reputation was legendary and feared. He had dismissed more than one graduate student for a single careless mistake in proof. On the wide whiteboard stretched across the wall, symbols sprawled in dense order. Groups, symmetries, continuous maps, hints of higher dimensional manifolds. He raised the marker for the next step. And then, the back door creaked open. The clock struck 9:07. Heads turned. In the doorway stood a little girl. Her blonde hair was tangled, half hidden beneath a frayed red hoodie. Her bare feet were wet from the rain, but her eyes, gray, steady, unblinking, held something no child should carry. A sharp flame of concentration, a gaze that pierced past the crowded equations. Callahan's brow furrowed. He was about to summon security, or at least send her out, when a small voice, steady yet trembling, crossed the silence. "Let me fix the axis of symmetry." A ripple ran through the room. A few graduate students chuckled, embarrassed on her behalf. Others stared, unsure if they had heard correctly. Callahan set the marker down on the desk. He looked at the child, then back at the unfinished sequence on the board. He leaned slightly forward. "What did you say?" The girl did not answer with words. She began to walk. Bare feet slapped softly against the polished wooden floor, leaving damp prints in her path. She reached the whiteboard, stretched on tiptoe, and with her thin fingers grasped the blue marker. Her hand shook. Her eyes did not. She started to write. The first strokes were simple. A redrawn axis of symmetry, shifted, tilted, almost playful, yet precise. From it, she spun arrows, tightened the recursion that had long defeated students, reducing its tangled loops to something almost self-evident. 7 minutes passed. 7 minutes in which the hall forgot to breathe. The sound of the marker was the only rhythm alive in that room. Each line seemed less a calculation than a pulse, as though the mathematics had always been waiting for someone to give it voice. One graduate student stood suddenly, eyes wide. "The hidden symmetry. She's seeing it." Callahan stepped forward, glasses sliding down the ridge of his nose. He traced each line silently, following the unbroken logic. No hesitation, no erasure, no backtracking. Only clarity. Only a quiet inevitability. And then, in a whisper so soft it startled his own ears, he said the words no one expected. "Yes, and beautiful." The room rose. Not because the problem was solved, it was not. The recursion still stretched further than any known method could tame. But because a barefoot child, untrained and unnamed, had shown them a doorway. A shift so simple, so natural, they wondered how all of them had missed it. Her name was not yet known to them, but the moment would be remembered. June Everheart. When the seminar ended, the students filed out in hushed astonishment. Callahan remained. The board was still alive with her blue handwriting. He touched the lines lightly, as though they might vanish at a breath. Her words echoed in him. "Let me fix the axis of symmetry." No textbook prepared a teacher for this. No lecture could explain how a child could step through the door of pure thought, uninvited, and belong there so completely. And for the first time in years, Callahan wondered whether mathematics itself had been waiting for someone with nothing to lose, someone who could still hear it breathing. June left the hall quietly. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the smell of earth and eucalyptus. Her bare feet splashed through shallow puddles. She held her worn backpack close to her chest. Inside it were only 3 notebooks, pages warped by dampness, and a single blue marker. She walked the long way back to the parking lot. At the far end sat a battered Econoline van, 1999 model, its paint peeling, windows fogged. The side door squealed as she pulled it open. Inside, her mother, Lena, lay curled beneath a thin blanket, fever burning her cheeks pale. June knelt, pressed her palm to her mother's forehead. Too hot. She whispered nothing, only opened her notebook and began to draw again, quietly, beside her mother's restless sleep. To her, numbers were not cold. They were alive. They wanted balance. They wanted to meet and to fold into one another like arms reaching in the dark. She listened, she followed, and her pencil answered. The van was falling apart, its roof leaking, its floor damp with old rain. But to June, it was a sky. The cardboard sheet pinned against the wall was her blackboard, her horizon. Meanwhile, whispers spread across Stanford. Who was that child? A photograph of the board circulated among graduate students. A grainy capture, hurried and off balance, yet the clarity of the lines was undeniable. Some dismissed it as chance. Others, more honest, admitted they felt shaken. Callahan sat alone in his office that night. He had printed the photo and pinned it to the wall beside his unfinished research. For hours he stared at the blue handwriting, at the unexpected elegance. And for the first time in decades, the old professor felt a pulse of wonder he had thought long dead, the need to find her. But June, that night, thought nothing of it. She lay curled in the van, her mother's breathing uneven beside her, the rain beginning again on the roof. She closed her eyes. In the silence, she heard what she always heard, mathematics breathing, softly, like wind against glass. And she believed, as only a child could, that she had been born to listen. The room was not accustomed to silence. Usually, a Stanford seminar was alive with interruptions, questions fired like arrows, chalk tapping, whispered arguments at the back. But for 7 minutes that morning, all those voices were swallowed by a barefoot child and the steady glide of a marker. Callahan himself, the man who had carved his career on dissecting flawed proofs, did not move. He could not. His silver brows furrowed, his hands loose at his sides, as he watched the girl rearrange a problem that had haunted the department for years. It was not the speed that astonished them. 7 minutes is nothing in mathematics. Problems often live for centuries. What stunned them was the clarity. On the board was a tangle known as a recursive symmetry problem. For older listeners, think of it like looking into 2 mirrors facing one another. You see yourself reflected again and again, smaller and smaller, stretching into infinity. Mathematicians call this recursion. The trouble is, when you try to capture those endless reflections with formulas, the expressions become heavy, unwieldy, impossible to simplify. The equation that morning was one such monster, a sequence of terms mirroring upon themselves, building a wall of symbols no one could reduce. Professors had taken turns over the years trying to cut through the thicket, only to give up with chalk-stained hands. June stepped to the board, eyes bright with a strange calm. She drew a single line, a new axis of symmetry, not the obvious vertical one everyone used, but angled. Then she began connecting terms across this hidden axis, pairing them like partners in a dance. The effect was immediate. Instead of staring into endless mirrors, Her structure folded the reflections together. Imagine, if you will, two lace curtains drawn not straight but diagonally. The patterns overlap, and suddenly the repeating shapes align. The impossible becomes manageable. A graduate student in the second row gasped audibly. He had once spent an entire summer wrestling with this problem, producing pages upon pages of calculations that ended in despair. And here, this child with bare feet had revealed the symmetry he never thought to tilt. June's hand moved without hesitation. Every few strokes she paused as if listening, then continued. It was not the pace of someone rushing. It was the rhythm of someone hearing something the rest of them could not. One professor scribbled frantically in a notebook, trying to follow. But he could not keep up. It was not speed that defeated him, but the elegance of the simplification. Callahan, meanwhile, leaned closer and whispered to himself almost reverently, "The recursion cancels. She's folding it down by a third." For the non-mathematicians in the room, that meant this. Instead of facing an endless chain of reflections, she had sliced the problem shorter, 1/3 of the complexity gone in a single sweep. The board looked different now, not cluttered, but breathing. White space opened between the symbols. The problem no longer resembled a storm of symbols, but something closer to music on a staff. At the 7-minute mark, June lowered the marker. She did not turn to face them. She simply stepped back, standing on tiptoe still, as though reluctant to release the rhythm she had been following. And the silence broke. One by one, the room rose. Not with the frantic energy of applause, but with the slow weight of recognition. Professors straightened from their seats. Students stood with mouths slightly open, the air thick with awe. It was not that she had solved the problem. That mountain remained. But she had shifted their perspective, and that alone was enough to lift them to their feet. Callahan walked to the board. The marker slipped from his fingers as he traced her lines with a trembling hand. Then he turned, his voice low, raw. "Yes, and beautiful." The word beautiful had not left his lips in years. Not in lectures, not in print, not in the privacy of his own notes. For mathematics was not usually spoken of with softness, but with rigor, with competition, with pride. And yet here he was, admitting beauty, in front of everyone. June did not smile. She simply lowered her gaze, clutching the marker like it was both shield and anchor. To her, this was not a performance. It was a conversation between herself and the breathing thing she called mathematics. The graduate students would later describe her handwriting. Not messy, not childish, but fluid, each curve balanced, each symbol set just far enough apart to breathe. They said it looked like music written on air. One student whispered, "She wasn't proving anything. She was showing us how to look." Another replied softly, "Like she was teaching us to listen." After the seminar, rumors scattered across campus. Some said she must have been a professor's child. Others, that she was a prodigy from abroad, smuggled into the class as a prank. But those who had seen her bare feet, the damp footprints on the floor, the frayed hoodie, knew better. "Who was she?" they asked. "Where did she come from?" The answer was silence. For June herself had already slipped away, back down the stairs, through the rain-damp courtyard, toward the parking lot where a rusted van awaited. But the 7 minutes remained. On the whiteboard, in the minds of those who had stood, and in the quiet heart of Professor Callahan, who had once thought he had seen everything. That evening, Callahan sat in his office alone. The photograph of the board, snapped in secret by a student, now rested on his desk. He traced the diagonal symmetry with his finger, shaking his head in disbelief. He remembered her voice. Small, fragile, yet certain. "Let me fix the axis of symmetry." It haunted him. Not because she had fixed it, but because she had seen it. For the first time in many years, the old professor felt humbled. And strangely, for the first time in many years, he felt hope. Meanwhile, in the van parked at the edge of campus, June curled beside her mother, whose fever had not broken. The air smelled of damp clothes and rust. The roof creaked under the rain. Her mother whispered weakly, "Did you draw again today?" June nodded, holding up her notebook. On the page was the same axis she had drawn on the board, the same dance of terms folding neatly. Her mother smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "Good. Keep listening." And June, pressing her cheek against the worn paper, believed she could still hear it, the breath of mathematics, whispering through her small, determined hands. The seminar hall had risen to its feet that morning. But by the time the whispers were spreading across campus, June was already gone. Out past the courtyards and statues, past the trimmed lawns, she walked barefoot across gravel, ignoring the curious looks of students hurrying between classes. She knew where she had to go. Always, she had to return before the fever worsened. The Econoline waited in the far corner of the parking lot, rust spreading along its sides like creeping moss. The paint had long since peeled, the windows fogged with condensation. To most, it was nothing but a relic, abandoned and forgotten. To June, it was home. She slid the side door open. The metal groaned, protesting like an old man. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with the mingled scents of mildew, wet blankets, and something medicinal, the remnants of pills too expensive to buy in full supply. Her mother, Lena, lay curled on the mattress of flattened foam. The fever had not broken. Beads of sweat clung to her forehead. Her breathing came shallow, uneven. June knelt. Her small hand brushed back strands of hair sticking to her mother's skin. She placed her palm against her forehead, hot, still too hot. "Mom," she whispered, "I'll get more water." Lena stirred, her eyes opening only slightly. They were pale green, once bright, now dulled by exhaustion. Yet even in sickness, there was gentleness in them. "Did you draw again today?" she asked faintly. June hesitated. Then she nodded. Her mother's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Good. Don't ever stop. That's your sky." The sky Lena spoke of was taped to the inside wall of the van. It was no ordinary blackboard. It was a patchwork of cardboard boxes, flattened and pinned together with duct tape. On their brown surface, June had drawn hundreds of lines with faded markers, arcs, grids, symbols, loops. Some had been erased and redrawn until the cardboard was nearly worn through. Others shone fresh, vivid blue from the marker she carried in her backpack. To outsiders, it was a mess. To June, it was a horizon. She called it her skyboard, because when she lay on her back at night, staring at it, she could imagine the universe unfolding. Each symbol was a star. Each connection was a constellation. Where others saw scribbles, she saw breathing patterns, whispers of balance. Sometimes when her mother was awake, June would explain softly, "See, Mom, when two numbers chase each other, it's like two birds circling in the air. But if they find a branch to land on, they don't chase anymore. They rest." Her mother would listen, eyes closed, smiling faintly. She never interrupted, never told June to stop. Even in fever, she understood. These numbers were not burdens to her daughter. They were the only wings she had. That evening, the fever rose higher. June filled a plastic bottle from the fountain outside a library and hurried back. She helped her mother sip, then placed the bottle by her side. For a while, Lena drifted between sleep and waking. When she spoke, her words came halting. "You'll be fine, June. You have something no one can take." June leaned close. "But I need you. If you're not here, the skyboard will feel empty." Her mother's hand found hers, weak but insistent. "No, June. If I'm not here, then the board will be everything. Promise me you'll keep drawing." June's throat tightened. She nodded, though her chest ached with a fear too large for her 9-year-old body. Outside, night fell across Stanford. Streetlights cast long shadows across the lot. Students passed in small groups, laughing, their voices distant. In their world, there were dormitories, lamps, bookshelves, warm meals. In June's world, there was the hum of a faulty van battery and the chill of damp blankets. She lay awake beside her mother, eyes fixed on the skyboard, and she thought of the morning, the way the professors had stood, the way the silence had broken into awe, the way the word beautiful had left Professor Callahan's lips. For a moment, she imagined she could still hear the echo of the marker on the board, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. She pressed her cheek against the notebook in her lap. On its pages were her diagrams, careful lines drawn by the weak light of a pocket flashlight. Her mind drifted toward the recursion she had shortened. She thought of it not as numbers, but as echoes. A voice repeating into infinity until she tilted the mirror and let the echoes fold back on themselves. To her, it felt like cradling a restless child until sleep found them. Numbers, too, wanted rest. In the depth of night, Lena stirred again. Her voice was a whisper. "Tell me, June, what do the numbers say tonight?" June swallowed the lump in her throat. She answered gently. "They say they want balance. They say they don't want to chase anymore. They want to hold each other and be still." Her mother smiled faintly, eyes closing once more. "That's good. That's good." And then she slept again, her breathing uneven but calmer. Across campus, in a quiet office lit by a single desk lamp, Callahan sat awake. The photograph of June's board lay before him. His pen hovered over paper, but he could not write. He kept hearing her voice. "Let me fix the axis of symmetry." He thought of her barefoot steps, the damp prints on the wood. He thought of her eyes, steady, unflinching, as though she had lived with mathematics longer than any of them. Something in him stirred, something he had not felt since he was a young man first in love with the mysteries of space and form. He whispered to the empty room, "Who are you, child?" But the night gave no answer. Back in the van, June finally closed her eyes. She dreamed not of hunger, nor of the fear of losing her mother, but of numbers that curved like wings. They folded, embraced, and found rest. Her last thought before sleep was simple, a child's prayer to the universe. Let me keep the sky. Let me keep listening. The rain lifted overnight. When dawn broke over Stanford, the sky was washed clean, pale as porcelain. Puddles shimmered on the brick pathways, and the eucalyptus leaves dripped steadily, like a clock measuring time drop by drop. In the seminar hall, the board had been wiped clean. The blue marker strokes were gone, erased by the custodian who never knew they had been history. Only faint smudges remained, ghosts of lines that had made scholars rise to their feet. But the memory had already slipped beyond those walls. At breakfast tables across campus, whispers moved faster than the morning coffee. "Did you hear? A little girl walked into Callahan's seminar yesterday." "What girl?" "Barefoot, in a hoodie. She fixed the axis. 7 minutes, they said." "No, that's impossible." "It happened. I saw the picture, and the picture did exist. A graduate student with trembling hands had managed to snap a photograph before the girl slipped away. It was grainy, tilted, the edge of her red hoodie barely visible at the corner. But the board itself, its symmetry, its unexpected elegance, was clear enough to send ripples through inboxes. The image moved from one student to another, then to faculty. By noon, copies had found their way to offices across the department. The question followed like a shadow. Who was she? In his office on the second floor of Jordan Hall, Callahan sat with the printed photograph pinned to his wall. He had stared at it through the small hours of the night, unable to leave it be. Even now, in the calm of morning, the lines still unsettled him. They were too graceful, too natural, as if the mathematics had drawn itself. Around him, shelves sagged under the weight of decades of journals and monographs, equations spilled across drafts stacked in uneven piles, yet none of it breathed the way those 7 minutes had. His door creaked open. It was Romani, a younger professor whose field overlapped with topology. She carried her coffee, her dark hair still damp from the morning rain. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. Callahan didn't look up. "Depends what you've heard." "That a child walked into your seminar. That she did this." Romani gestured to the photograph. Callahan finally turned, his eyes tired. "It is true." Romani stepped closer, studying the handwriting. "This isn't mimicry. Whoever wrote this understood what she was doing." "She saw what we missed," Callahan said quietly. "All these years, and she tilted the axis as if it were obvious." Romani traced a line with her fingertip, though it was only ink on paper now. "Do you know who she is?" Callahan shook his head. "Not yet." By midday, the department hummed like a hive. Some dismissed the story outright. "A prodigy, perhaps, but barefoot, in a hoodie? Sounds like myth-making." Others leaned in with conspiratorial voices. "I heard she's the daughter of a visiting mathematician. A performance, maybe." A few, more honest, admitted unease. "I don't care who she is. The symmetry works. I checked it myself." The older professors muttered in the lounge, papers in hand, their pride quietly bruised. Students lingered in hallways, rehashing every rumor, every fragment. And beneath it all, a deeper feeling spread. The sense that something rare had brushed against them, like a bird's wing against a shoulder, too brief, too fragile, but unforgettable. Far from the gossip, June sat on the floor of the van, her notebook open. The morning light filtered through the fogged window, laying soft patterns on the cardboard wall she called her skyboard. Her mother's fever had eased a little after the long night. She slept now, her breathing still shallow but calmer. June drew in silence. She was not thinking of the whispers on campus, nor the photograph traveling from desk to desk. She was listening to the quiet insistence of numbers asking to be balanced, to curves longing to meet. The van rocked gently in the morning breeze. To June, it felt as though the world itself was waiting. That afternoon, Callahan walked across campus with the photograph folded neatly in his jacket. He found himself stopping beneath the eucalyptus trees, listening to the rustle of leaves as if they might answer his questions. "Who are you, child?" he murmured again. He thought of her footprints, damp on the seminar floor. Proof that she had been real. Proof that she had not been a dream conjured by tired eyes. For the first time in decades, Callahan felt uncertainty not as a threat, but as an invitation. Evening fell. In the faculty lounge, conversations circled endlessly. In the dormitories, students pulled up the photograph on glowing laptop screens, pointing at the lines, arguing, marveling. And in the far corner of the lot, the Econoline stood quiet. Inside, June lit her small flashlight. Her mother stirred weakly. "Did you draw again today?" Lena whispered. "Yes, Mom," June said softly. "The skyboard is never empty." Her mother's hand reached out, resting on her daughter's arm. Her voice was fragile but steady. "Then you're not empty either." June nodded, though tears pressed at her eyes. She turned back to the board, marker poised. Outside, beyond the walls of the van, the whole department wondered who she was. But inside, June knew the truth. She was not trying to be anyone. She was only listening and drawing what she heard. That night, Callahan remained at his desk, the photograph still pinned before him. He wrote one line in his notebook, words that felt both confession and vow. "If mathematics has a breath, yesterday a child taught us how to hear it." He set his pen down. The rain returned, soft against the glass. The whispers had not faded. If anything, they had thickened, weaving themselves into the very air of the mathematics department. Professors argued in hallways, graduate students lingered longer in the lounge, and everyone seemed to walk with an extra beat of curiosity in their step. But Callahan could not rest. The photograph pinned above his desk no longer satisfied him. The board had been wiped clean, but the memory of her handwriting burned like a lantern in the dark. He knew he had to find her. 2 days after the storm, he did. It was early morning. The sky was pale, washed with the color of old parchment. Callahan carried his coffee across the courtyard, his steps heavy. He had spent the night grading papers, though his mind had been elsewhere, circling back again and again to those 7 minutes. And then he saw her. She sat on a stone bench near the library, the one shaded by an ancient oak. Her red hoodie hung loosely on her small frame. Bare feet tucked beneath her. She bent over a notebook resting on her knees. Her marker moved steadily, line by line, as though she were tracing something only she could see in the air. Callahan froze. For a moment he wondered if he was dreaming again. But no, the morning was too cold, the damp air too real. He approached slowly. "Everheart." She lifted her head. Her eyes were calm, though not unguarded. She studied him in silence, marker still poised above the page. "That's your name, isn't it?" Callahan asked gently. "June Everheart." She blinked, then gave the smallest nod. He sat down at the far end of the bench, careful not to crowd her. The oak's branches stretched above them, leaves stirring softly in the breeze. "You walked into my seminar," he said. His voice was rough, not from anger, but from the weight of his own astonishment. June lowered her eyes back to the page. "I just wanted to fix the axis." Callahan allowed himself a small smile. "You did more than that." For a time, neither spoke. The campus stirred around them, students with backpacks rushing to lectures, bicycles rattling over bricks. But at the bench, there was only the slow rhythm of her marker. Finally, Callahan asked, "Where do you go after you leave here?" June's hand stilled. She closed her notebook gently, hugging it against her chest. "Home." "And where is home?" Her silence was answer enough. Callahan exhaled, rubbing his temple. He wanted to push further, but something in her posture stopped him. She was a child, yes, but also something else. Fierce, private, untouchable. He shifted instead. "I don't want charity for you," he said. "That's not what I'm offering. What you did deserves recognition. Not pity. Recognition." June looked at him then, eyes narrowing slightly as if testing whether his words were real. "What kind of recognition?" "A place to work, resources, a program called the Bridge Program. It's not a handout. It's an acknowledgement that you belong where the questions are asked." June tilted her head, considering. She did not answer. That evening, Callahan followed the quiet trail he had suspected for days. the path leading away from campus, across the lot, to the corner where the rusted Econoline rested. He hesitated at the door, uncertain if he should knock on a van. But before he could, it slid open. June stood there, wary, her notebook in hand. Behind her, on the foam mattress, Lena stirred. The sight startled him. He had prepared himself for poverty, for hardship. But he had not prepared himself for the dignity of the woman who lay there, even in sickness. Her eyes, fever bright, lifted toward him. "Are you Professor Callahan?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I am." She smiled faintly, though her lips were pale. "June said you would come." June looked from her mother to the professor, protective. "We don't need anything," she whispered. Callahan shook his head. "I didn't come to give you anything. I came because your daughter gave something to all of us, and I want to honor that." Lena studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She reached out, brushing her daughter's arm. "It's all right, June." Inside the van, the smell of damp fabric and faint medicine filled the air. Callahan sat awkwardly on a crate while June perched at her mother's side. The cardboard skyboard stretched along the wall, covered in diagrams that looked wild yet oddly harmonious. He stared at it, astonished. This is your blackboard?" June's chin lifted a little. "It's my sky." The word struck him. For decades he had thought of mathematics as structure, proof, rigor. He had forgotten it could also be a sky, a place wide enough to hold dreams. He turned back to Lena. "Her mind is extraordinary. But more than that, her heart, the way she sees beauty, even in recursion. It's something I have not seen in all my years of teaching." Lena's eyes glistened. She whispered, "She has always listened, even when there was no one to teach her." Callahan bowed his head. He felt suddenly small, humbled by the weight of what he had stumbled into. Before he left, he placed his card on the small table by the van's door. "The bridge program," he said. "It begins next term. Not a gift, not charity, a recognition. Let her come." June did not pick up the card. She only looked at it, then at him, with a mixture of suspicion and something softer. Callahan rose. "The board in that seminar, it's still alive in people's minds. But it belongs to you, June, not to us. And if you want, Stanford can be your skyboard, too." He stepped out into the night air, the door sliding closed behind him. Later, as June lay beside her mother, she held the professor's card in her hand. The words meant little to her yet, but the tone of his voice lingered. Her mother whispered, half dreaming, "He believes in you." June stared at the cardboard skyboard, marker resting on her knee. "I don't need him to believe," she murmured. "I just need the numbers to keep breathing." But even as she said it, her small hand closed around the card. Not tightly, not yet with trust, but with the first fragile acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, she would not always be alone. The invitation was not written in gilded script. It arrived on plain white paper, tucked inside a folder June found waiting on the stone bench beneath the oak tree. At the top, in small serif letters, it read, "Special Session, Review Council, Department of Mathematics, Stanford University." Beneath the details, time, room, names of faculty, and one note, scribbled in a familiar hand. "Bring the marker. The board is yours." Signed, Callahan. June's fingers trembled as she held the folder. She had never been invited anywhere in her life, not to birthdays, not to classrooms, not to the ordinary circles where children belonged. And now this. A council of professors, the highest voices of the department, waiting for her. That evening in the van, she showed it to her mother. Lena lay propped on pillows, her fever quieter now, but her body still frail. She traced the words with her fingertip, lips curving faintly. "They want you to come back," she whispered. June bit her lip. "What if they laugh? What if they see I don't belong?" Her mother shook her head. "They already saw." And they stood. The appointed day arrived. June walked barefoot once more, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, the blue marker clutched tight. The sun was pale, the kind of California morning when light felt thin, like paper. She entered the hall. This time it was not a seminar, but a chamber arranged like a court. Professors sat in rows, notepads ready, eyes sharp. Some looked curious, others skeptical. A few looked outright impatient. Callahan stood at the side, his expression unreadable. He gave her a small nod, as if to say, "It is still your sky." The board loomed in front of her, a wide expanse of white, untouched. Her heart pounded, her hands shook, but then she lifted the marker, uncapped it, and let the smell of ink steady her. She began not with solving, but with building. On the left, she drew a single branch, the recursive problem as they knew it, sprawling into infinite reflections. Then, with careful strokes, she drew a second branch beside it, and another. Soon, the board bore what looked like a tree. Each branch split, each line forked, smaller and smaller, stretching upward. Then she paused, turned, and said softly, "We are not meant to prune one leaf at a time. We are meant to shorten the tree." Her voice, though quiet, carried. She picked up the line at the root and showed how, by folding symmetries diagonally, the tree lost 1/3 of its branches before it even grew. Instead of infinity upon infinity, she revealed a pattern that clipped itself, folding neatly like paper. The professors leaned forward. The structure was not a solution, but a framework, a scaffolding. She was not cutting away blindly. She was constructing a system that breathed. Callahan whispered under his breath, "She's not solving, she's building." The room grew tense, alive. Pens scratched furiously. One professor muttered, "This reduces the recursion depth." And another hissed, "Yes, by a measurable fraction." June did not hear them. She was lost in the rhythm, the soft squeak of ink on board, the unfolding of something only she could see. At last, she stepped back. The board stood filled, but not cluttered. White spaces gleamed between blue lines, as if the mathematics itself had been given lungs. She turned, marker still in her hand, and said simply, "The board is not where you end. It is where you build." The silence lasted only a moment. Then the sound rose. Applause, genuine, rolling. Not polite, not forced, but real. Some clapped standing, some with tears pricking their eyes, some still shaking their heads at the audacity of what they had witnessed. And June, small in her hoodie, barefoot on the polished floor, stood amidst it all, marker clutched like a sword she barely realized she carried. Afterward, Romani approached her. She knelt so their eyes were level, her expression warm. "You don't have to fear ceilings anymore," she said. "Wherever you go, we'll put a board for you. Every room, every sky." June looked at her, startled. Then her gaze softened. For the first time, she felt the corners of her mouth lift, the smallest smile escaping. That evening, she hurried back to the van. Her mother was waiting, propped against the pillows, eyes bright with curiosity. "Well?" Lena whispered. June climbed into her lap, pressing the marker against her mother's hand. "They clapped, Mom. Not because I solved, because I built." Her mother stroked her hair gently. That's all life is, June. Not solving, building. June lay against her chest, listening to the unsteady but precious rhythm of her breathing. And for the first time since the fever began, June thought, maybe she will live long enough to see the skyboard turn into something bigger than cardboard. In his office, Callahan pinned a new photograph to the wall. Not of equations this time, but of the girl herself, standing small before the vast whiteboard, blue ink spread like branches of a living tree. He wrote beneath it in his notebook, "Recognition begins here." The van had sheltered them through storms, through heat, through countless nights of hunger and fever. But it had never been a home. One morning, Callahan arrived at the parking lot, not alone but with a quiet delegation from the university's bridge program. Papers in hand, voices low, they approached the old Econoline. June stiffened when she saw them. Her first instinct was to guard the door, to shield her mother. But Lena, propped on pillows, raised a trembling hand. "It's all right, June," she whispered. "Let them speak." And so Callahan explained. Housing was ready, a small apartment near campus, furnished simply but with warmth. Medical care for Lena had been arranged, with doctors who would not send them away for lack of money. It was not charity, he said again. It was recognition. June listened in silence. She held her mother's hand, studying the lines in Callahan's face, the sincerity in his voice. She wanted to trust him. She feared to trust him. But Lena's eyes glistened. "Yes," she said softly. "For June. For her sky." The apartment was modest. A single bedroom, a kitchen with humming refrigerator, windows that looked out onto a courtyard where roses bloomed. But to June, it was a palace. There was a bed with clean sheets, a bathroom with running water, a desk of polished wood, and on the desk, a lamp. A simple lamp with a brass neck and a shade that glowed soft yellow when she turned it on. June touched it with reverence. She had never had a lamp of her own. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The ceiling was white, solid, a boundary. In the van, she had looked up at cardboard patched with diagrams, believing it was the sky. Here, there was no sky, only plaster. Her chest tightened. She whispered into the darkness, "What if I lose it? What if the sky is gone?" The next day, Romani came to visit. She brought fruit in a basket and books in her arms, but when she saw June's unease, she set them aside. "What troubles you, June?" she asked gently. June hesitated, then pointed upward. "There's a ceiling, no sky. In the van, I could draw above me. Here, it's just walls. What if the numbers can't breathe?" Romani knelt, her voice warm. "June, the sky isn't something you lose. It's something you carry. And if you need boards, we'll place them in every room you step into. You'll never run out of sky." Her words sank slowly, like rain into dry soil. June listened, wide-eyed. She wanted to believe. Meanwhile, Lena began her treatment. The doctors confirmed what June had feared. The illness was real, complicated, but not yet beyond hope. Medicine was started, checkups scheduled. For the first time in months, Lena's fever eased enough for her to sit by the window, sunlight on her face. She watched her daughter at the desk, bent over her notebook beneath the lamp. The sight filled her with both pride and sorrow. Pride, because June's brilliance was undeniable. Sorrow, because she wondered how long she would live to see it. One evening, as June scribbled symbols under the lamp's circle of light, Lena whispered, "You're not afraid of the dark, are you?" June shook her head. "No, I'm afraid of ceilings." Lena smiled faintly. "Then remember, Ceilings are only walls turned sideways. Walls don't stop the sky. They only frame it. June paused, marker in hand. Slowly she nodded. But fear does not vanish in a night. Some evenings, June would climb onto her bed and stare at the ceiling until tears slipped down her cheeks. She missed the van's patched roof, the cardboard horizon of her skyboard. She missed the sense that nothing stood between her and the stars. One night, Callahan visited. He found her curled on the bed, notebook pressed against her chest. "What is it?" he asked quietly. She sat up, wiped her eyes. "I'm afraid the ceiling will make me forget how to listen." Callahan considered. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small portable whiteboard, no larger than a window pane. He propped it against the wall. "This," he said, "is yours. And when this board fills, we'll bring another, and another, until every wall you touch is sky again." June looked at him, startled. Her lips trembled. She whispered, "Promise?" "Promise," he said. And so, room by room, the apartment changed. A board in the bedroom, another in the living room, even a small one in the kitchen, where June would sometimes draw patterns while her mother sipped broth. The walls no longer felt like barriers. They became frames for horizons, surfaces for breathing numbers. June began to relax. The lamp became her sun, the boards her sky. Slowly, she began to believe she had not lost what mattered. One night, as Lena dozed on the couch, June sat at the desk under the lamp. She wrote a line in her notebook, not a formula, but a sentence. "The sky is not above me. It is wherever the numbers breathe." She closed the notebook gently, laid her cheek upon it, and drifted to sleep. The lamp glowed steady, a small star keeping vigil. In his office, Callahan added another note to his journal beneath the pinned photographs. "She fears losing the sky. Perhaps that is what genius is, the refusal to accept ceilings." He closed the book, his heart heavy but alive. For in June's fear, he saw not weakness, but the kind of hunger that would one day move mountains. The boards had multiplied. What began as one whiteboard leaning against her bedroom wall had spread. Now every room of the small apartment held a surface waiting for her marker. One in the kitchen above the sink, one near her mother's chair in the living room, one even propped in the hallway where the light barely reached. And June filled them. Not chaotically, not with the wild scrawl of a restless child, but with lines that curved and folded like music. Every morning she woke to white space calling her name. Every night she fell asleep with ink on her fingers. Her mother watched from the couch, her strength returning slowly with treatment. Sometimes Lena laughed softly, saying, "We should call this place Everheart Observatory. All your stars are indoors now." June would answer, serious as ever, "Not stars, Mom. Shapes that breathe." It was in late spring that Callahan and Romani invited her to a quiet session in a small seminar room. Only a few faculty attended. They wanted to see how she worked, not to pressure her, but to listen. June stood before the board, marker poised. She began with a simple circle. Then, without explanation, she drew another beside it, overlapping slightly. Two circles breathing into one another. "Two spaces," she said softly. "They want to share air." She placed a dot in the center where they overlapped, then curved her line inward, folding the two circles into something more fluid. The shape swelled, then narrowed, like two arms reaching, like two bodies leaning close. The professors leaned forward. "It's an intuitive manifold," one whispered. Romani asked gently, "What do you call it, June?" June paused, then wrote two words beneath the drawing in neat, small letters. "Hug shape." She explained in her own way, careful, quiet. When two spaces are near, they don't want to stay apart. They fold toward each other. The overlap is not empty. It breathes. It is like when you hug someone. You are still two, but you are also one. Callahan swallowed hard. He knew the formal language, fiber bundles, manifolds, embeddings. He had taught them for decades. But hearing them translated into the language of a child, stripped of jargon and dressed in tenderness, unsettled him. Not because it was wrong, but because it was truer than all the precise words he had used. Word spread again, this time not through rumor, but through paper. One of the professors drafted a short note describing the structure June had sketched. They called it, informally at first, the June mapping. Students began copying the hug shape onto their notes, almost reverently. Some joked, some marveled, but all felt its pull. It was not only mathematics, it was metaphor, a way of remembering that even the coldest symbols could touch. At home, June returned to her boards and drew the hug shape over and over. Sometimes small, like two circles leaning. Sometimes vast, stretching across the wall, arms of curvature enfolding. Her mother would watch, eyes soft. "It looks like us," Lena whispered once, pulling her daughter into an embrace. "You and me, always overlapping." June pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, marker still in hand. "Then the hug shape is ours." A week later, Romani asked June to present the shape to a wider group. This time the room was fuller. Graduate students, postdocs, even visiting scholars. June stood small before the board, her red hoodie loose around her shoulders, feet bare on the polished floor. She drew the circles, the fold, the overlap. "This is a hug," she said simply. "Spaces don't like being lonely." A ripple of laughter moved gently through the room, not mocking but charmed. Then silence as they leaned closer. She continued, "We call them manifolds. They can fold, they can breathe, and when they do, they show us where the world holds together." When she finished, there was no applause, only stillness. Then slowly, one student placed his hands together. Another followed. And soon the whole room was clapping, not in thunder but in rhythm, as if honoring not just an idea, but a reminder that mathematics could be tender. That night, back at the apartment, June opened her notebook. She did not write formulas. She drew the hug shape one last time, and beneath it, in her small, careful hand, a single note. When two spaces want to share a breath, they create a hug shape. She closed the notebook and slipped it under her pillow. Her mother, half asleep, murmured, "What did they say today?" June smiled faintly. "They called it the June mapping." Lena's eyes opened, glistening. She brushed her daughter's hair back. "Then the world has learned your hug." In his office, Callahan pinned a new page beside the others. This one bore only the drawing, two circles folding, overlapping, and the two words written by a child's hand. Hug shape. He stood long before it, whispering to himself, "This is not mathematics as I knew it. This is mathematics as it should have been." The lecture hall had been chosen carefully. It was not the largest on campus, but it was tall, with arched windows that let the light in as though the sky itself wished to listen. Rows of wooden seats rose in quiet tiers, their polish worn smooth by decades of restless students. On the door outside, a simple sign was taped, "Public Lecture, June Everheart, the Horizon of Mathematics." There was no fanfare, no posters splashed across campus. And yet, when the hour arrived, the hall filled. Professors, graduate students, undergraduates curious to see the child who had shaken the department, a few administrators, skeptical but intrigued. Even a handful of townspeople who had heard whispers of a barefoot prodigy. At the back of the hall, Lena sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in a shawl. The doctors had worried, but she insisted. Her face was pale, her frame frail, but her eyes gleamed with the stubborn fire of a mother who would not miss her child's voice. Callahan stood at the side, heart tight with something he could not name. Pride, fear, hope all braided together. Then the hush fell, and June, small in her red hoodie, marker in hand, stepped to the board. She began not with numbers, but with silence. Her eyes swept the room, calm and steady. Then, with slow strokes, she drew a single line across the board. A horizon. "This," she said softly, "is where mathematics breathes." The room leaned forward. She explained in her way, "When we solve, we often try to close the line, to finish it. To say, here is the end. But sometimes the line is not meant to close. Sometimes it is meant to stretch, to breathe." She drew shapes rising above the line, curves, trees, loops. She drew shapes sinking below, arcs, folds, spaces. And then she pointed at the horizon again. This is where they meet, above and below, known and unknown. It is not an answer. It is the place where questions breathe. A murmur passed through the hall. Students scribbled furiously. Professors shifted in their seats. Some frowned, some nodded, but all were listening. June continued, her voice steady. The recursion we face, the endless mirrors, it is not failure. It is the breath of mathematics. Each reflection asks, do you hear me still? And if we tilt, if we fold, we let the mirrors rest. We let the question breathe. She turned, wrote a small note beneath the horizon line. The point of mathematics is not to end breathing, but to join it. For a long moment, there was no sound but the squeak of the marker. Then, from the back of the hall, a soft noise. A clap. It was Lena. She had pushed herself upright in the wheelchair, her thin hands trembling but steady enough to strike once. Then again. Her face shone with pride, tears streaking down her cheeks. The sound carried. It broke the silence. One student rose, clapping with both hands, then another and another. Soon the whole hall was standing, applauding not in thunderous frenzy, but in something deeper. A rhythm, slow and heavy, like a heart remembering its beat. Callahan's throat closed. He had heard applause for lectures, for proofs, for announcements of awards. But never this. Never applause not for a conclusion, but for a reminder that mathematics was still alive. June stood still, marker in hand, her small frame dwarfed by the vast whiteboard. She did not bow. She did not smile. She simply lowered her head, as if embarrassed by the storm of hands. But when she lifted her eyes again, she sought only one face, her mother's. And when she saw Lena clapping, frail but unyielding, she let a small smile flicker across her lips. After the lecture, the hall emptied slowly. Some lingered in clusters, whispering about the horizon line. Others sat quietly, as though afraid to break the spell. Callahan approached Lena, his voice rough. She gave them something today I could never teach. Lena, still trembling from the effort, smiled. She gave them breath. June joined them, slipping her hand into her mother's. Did I do all right, Mom? She asked softly. Lena cupped her cheek. You did more than all right. You gave me a horizon. That night, back at the apartment, June opened her notebook. She drew the line again. The horizon. Above it, shapes of hope. Below it, shadows of doubt. At the center, a small circle where the two touched. She wrote beneath it, "Mom's hands were the first applause. That is enough." She closed the notebook and placed it beside her pillow. Her mother slept nearby, the shawl pulled tight, breathing uneven but present. And June whispered into the dark, "As long as she claps, the sky will never close." In his office, Callahan wrote in his journal. She stood at the board and spoke of breath, and her mother rose to clap. The room followed. Not because they understood every symbol, but because they remembered that knowledge is not a cage. It is a horizon. He closed the book, and for the first time in years, his chest felt light. The board that June had filled in her Horizon lecture remained untouched for 3 days. Professors passed by the hall, glancing through the open door. Students paused, whispering as they stared at the blue line of the horizon, the curves rising and falling around it. None dared erase it. None dared add to it. It had become more than mathematics. It had become a relic. But relics, June knew, were dangerous. On the 4th morning, she returned. The hall was empty, dust motes drifting in the shafts of light. The board still bore her handwriting, steady and unbroken. Her name had begun to spread beyond campus now. Articles drafted, interviews requested, whispers of the barefoot child at Stanford carried across the country. She looked at the board for a long time, then she lifted the eraser. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from love. She pressed the felt against the surface and dragged it downward. The blue vanished, stroke by stroke. By the time she finished, the board gleamed white again, wide and waiting. When Callahan entered and saw her, he stopped short. "What are you doing?" June turned, eraser still in her hand. "The board is not mine to keep. If I leave it filled, no one else will draw." Callahan swallowed. His heart ached, yet he knew she was right. She set the eraser down gently and said, almost in a whisper, "Let someone else breathe." That evening, she and her mother sat in the courtyard of their apartment building. The roses swayed in the dusk. June's marker lay idle in her lap. "I erased it today," she said. Lena looked at her quietly. "Did it hurt?" June thought for a moment. "Yes, but it felt right, like setting the sky free again." Her mother reached out, brushing her daughter's cheek. "Then you've understood something most never do, that knowledge isn't about possession, it's about passing it on." Weeks passed, and then the idea took root. With support from Callahan, from Romani, from others who had stood in that hall, June began to shape a dream. Not a laboratory, not a department, something smaller, warmer. They found an old garden corner near campus, quiet and filled with oak trees. There they raised a weatherproof whiteboard, bolted to the trunk of a great oak. Beneath it, a simple wooden bench. June painted words across the top in her neat hand. "This board is yours. Take a breath, then begin." And thus was born the Everheart Studio. Not a place of degrees or awards, but a place of invitation. Anyone could come. Students, children, passers-by, anyone with a question or simply a longing to draw. On opening day, only a handful gathered. Callahan stood with Romani, Lena seated warmly in her shawl, June barefoot in the grass. June uncapped her marker, wrote one line, a horizon, and stepped back. Then she placed the marker on the ledge and waited. For a long while, no one moved. Then a boy of 12, shy and unsure, stepped forward. He picked up the marker and added a small curve above the line. Others followed. Soon the board began to bloom, not with perfect proofs, but with attempts, guesses, drawings half-formed and honest. June stood quietly at the side, smiling, not because the board belonged to her, but because it no longer did. At night, when the garden was empty, June would sometimes return alone. She would stand before the board, tracing the faint marks left by others. She no longer needed to fill it. The sky was safe. Lena's health remained fragile, but she lived to see it. One evening she whispered to Callahan, "She has built something larger than herself. That is all any of us can hope." Callahan nodded, eyes glistening. She has built a horizon. Years later, people would still speak of the barefoot girl who once walked into Stanford and changed the air of a seminar room. But June Everheart herself would not dwell on it. She would remember instead the sound of her mother's first applause, the glow of a desk lamp, the curve of the hug shape, the warmth of a horizon line. And above all, she would remember the morning she erased the board to give someone else the chance to begin. Thank you, my friend, for walking with June Everheart through this journey of silence, courage, and horizons. If her story has given you warmth or reminded you why knowledge matters, I invite you to stay close. Subscribe so that each new chapter finds you again, like a letter at your doorstep. And until we meet next time, may your days be gentle, and may your nights carry the quiet breath of hope.